anytime we're building a resume, we're looking for metrics, we're looking for numbers, any kind of variables, anything that we can put a dollar figure on, a percentage on. So if you were a leader and you took over a team that was underperforming, it's okay to say, I took over a team of 5 people. They were doing $10 million a year in revenue, and I led them to grow $12 million in revenue.
That's Robynn Storey's approach to career branding. As the founder of Storyline Resumes, she helps top executives craft powerful personal brands that grab attention and get results. Robynn knows that owning your wins and backing them up with hard numbers is what earns respect, builds credibility, and unlocks new opportunities in today's competitive market. If you're a business leader or agency exec ready to elevate your brand and drive growth, you don't want to miss this. Let's dive in. Welcome to the DesignRush Podcast. I'm Kia Johnson. Got a story worth sharing? Email us at spotlight@designrush.com. Leaders like you, don't miss out. Like, subscribe, and stay on top of your game. Robynn, welcome to the show. I've been looking so forward to this one. Your insights on personal branding are like next level. So I know this conversation is going to be packed with gold. We're going to kick things off, though, with some rapid fire questions. So let's get stuck into that right now. So, Robynn, your first rapid fire question is, if you had to sum up your personal journey in one word, what would it be?
Unexpected.
What single word captures the biggest lesson life has taught you?
Change.
One trait every top executive must have.
Empathy.
The biggest deal breaker in a resume?
Lack of accomplishments.
Best way to win a high-value client?
Honesty.
And lastly, one word that describes your leadership style?
Fun.
So, Robynn, let us get into the real conversation now. Personal branding isn't just about looking good on paper. It's about impact. It's about influence. And it's also about opportunity. So I want us to get into these questions right now and then just truly dive into them. So if you can unpack this for me as you do, it would be amazing. Now, Robynn, you've built a career on helping executives tell their stories in a way that stands out. Now, why do you think storytelling is such a powerful tool when it actually comes to shaping executive brands and career paths?
It's honest. It is genuine. When you tell a story in a resume, or when I go on LinkedIn and tell a story about a client, or you build a LinkedIn profile and you tell a story about your successes, the genuineness really has to shine through. People relate to it. They don't want to be fed content. They want to be told stories. They want to feel like they know you.
I would assume also, through what you have done, that you've actually seen storytelling completely change someone's career then, or even the direction of a company. If you could maybe highlight a moment like that has happened, do you think you can actually walk us through a moment, and tell us what transpired in that time?
Whenever Storyline was a fairly new company, I was pretty new to LinkedIn. And I would do posts about, resumes and what should be on and what should be off. And I thought, this really isn't getting very much traction. People aren't coming here for that kind of advice. So I had spoken with a client that was passed over for a job that was perfect for him. And on a Friday evening, right before I logged off, I did this rant on LinkedIn about how employers need to stop looking for a perfect candidate. They don't exist. We all have flaws. We all have resume gaps. We all have jobs that maybe didn't work out, and that, we're only human, and there needs to be the same empathetic treatment of candidates that you would have for a stranger that you would meet on the street. And this rant, much like most of my posts, was a little bit funny, a little bit bitchy, a little bit, aggressive. And when I woke up on Saturday morning and I logged into my emails, I had 10,000 LinkedIn connection requests and 3,000 messages overnight. And I realized, I thought it was something happened. I thought someone hacked my account. I thought something weird was going on. But I realized that post that I did, by the time I left on Friday night at 5:30 until Saturday morning at 7 o'clock, It had millions of views, hundreds of thousands of likes and comments, and engagement through the roof. And I realized right then and there what people on LinkedIn were looking for was honesty, genuineness, advocacy, and fellowship. And from there, my approach was completely different.
And I mean, I think, to be blunt, but not like in a crude way, just laying
Right.
it out there and being open and, as you mentioned, transparent. Yeah. So what would you say are then some of the biggest mistakes that leaders actually make when they're trying to tell these stories?
I think that the biggest mistake that they make is humility. Depending on what generation you are. So my generation, I'm Gen X, right? Our mothers taught us not to brag about ourselves. There is a level of uncomfortability in people owning their accomplishments, whether it's on their resume, whether it's in conversation, or whether it's on their LinkedIn profile. And that's really the biggest obstacle. So if you're someone over the age of 40, you're not likely to, want to brag. Younger generations are sort of used to telling their story on social media, how it is that they engage with others. Very, very different. So we see that the biggest obstacle is that people don't want to own their accomplishments, and we need to get them past that. We need to get them to the point where they feel comfortable with what we're saying, the numbers that we're including, the facts, the figures, and the impact that they've had on their jobs. And I would say that would be the biggest challenge when we're working with senior and executive level clients.
So now, Robyn, I'm hearing what you're saying, and I feel that there's often a fine line, between like being authentic and maintaining professionalism. So if you were to advise executives like how they would actually strike that balance, what would you say to them?
So for me, it's all about facts and figures, right? Anytime we're building a resume, we're looking for metrics, we're looking for numbers, any kind of variables, anything that we can put a dollar figure on, a percentage on. So if you were a leader and you took over a team that was underperforming, it's okay to say, I took over a team of 5 people. They were doing $10 million a year in revenue, and I led them to grow $12 million in revenue. Instead of just saying, I led them to be very successful. That's the variation, right? People can relate to and understand, and people love numbers, even if you aren't in the numbers game. Everyone realizes somebody building a team, developing revenue from 10 million to 12 million, that's a big deal. I can wrap my head around that. But when you're just talking about, I'm a great leader because I, help people, perform better or whatever, that's where you get the squiggly lines, right? So if you can own your successes and you can put a number on them, that is really the best approach on your resume.
So it's very interesting that you're talking about these sort of metrics right now, right? Because I mean, when you just say, "Oh, I led these people and I did amazing things," it does actually come across as disingenuous in a way. But if you, but exactly, but like, so if you're able to actually back that up, then to say that, "Oh, you know what, this is where we're at." And this is where we headed, and this is where we are, and this is where we'd like to be, and this is perhaps the things that we implemented. That would really set you apart, right?
Absolutely. And I love the story of how did we get there? What are the things that I did, right? So you make the claim and then you back it up with the facts. So whether or not it was a retraining effort, whether or not it was better motivation or mentorship, whether or not it was, taking someone who was really struggling, maybe they couldn't balance their work life, their professional and their personal life, and you did something to give them some sort of an accommodation. That's what real leadership is about. It's not going in and yelling at people and, making them perform better because you're yelling at them, right? Real leadership is meeting people where they are. And I think that that is such an important message to be telling on your resume, that you have the capability to do that.
I think that's amazing. And just in terms of the metrics themselves, I guess it would then be for each and every leader, it would then obviously be different because it depends, where you are at, what you're trying to actually put out there, and then what it is that you're hoping to get back in return. Am I right?
Absolutely. And I always say, even if you are not revenue generating, even if you are a revenue center, even if your job doesn't have anything to do with metrics, there is definitely something that can be measured in everybody's position. So I always use the example of an accountant, right? So accountants or a corporate controller or whatever, they talk on their resumes about how they balance the budget, how they, manage the general ledger, how they might oversee AP, AR, whatever. When you're in that role and you're applying for a role similar, everybody already knows what you do, right? I need to know what differentiates you. Did you take a team that was underperforming and turn them around? Did you cut the production, or did you cut the budget creation timeline from 2 months to 6 weeks? Did you integrate or gain buy-in for new technology investment for your accounting department? That tells me something about you. So I think the mistake that a lot of people make is they do a lot of describing their job on their resume when they really should be describing themselves. And again, those measurements. Everybody has something to measure.
I'm just loving this. And I can see now why it is that, you've worked with so many top executives and you've shaped their personal brands to be success stories, at the end of the day. So what I want to find out from you is, at what point do you think a leader's personal brand stops being about them and it starts playing a bigger role in the success of the company itself?
Yeah, look, you've seen the stories, right? Over the past year, the layoffs have been brutal. The idea that, you call a Zoom meeting with, 20,000 people, or a Teams meeting with 20,000 people and you lay them off over. These are all things that translate into who you are as a human being, how you want to be perceived in the marketplace, and how you lead others. So, going to your rapid fire question, I think that the most important trait the leader can have is empathy. You have to realize that these are people. They are not numbers on spreadsheets, right? They are not cogs in a wheel. These are humans with lives and families and, wants and desires and hobbies and quirks and all of those things. So when, to kind of circle back to that personal branding, you'll find that companies that have really great culture don't have really great culture because there's, sort of a culture czar, right? They have really great culture because they have leaders that walk the walk. They have leaders that like people. They have leaders that want you to succeed and understand that while it's still a business, the success comes from the people.
And I guess then, in saying that, because every company's got its own identity, values, and culture, this is actually a way that an executive can make sure that their personal brand aligns in with that company's mission, rather than feeling separate or disconnected, because that then plays into just the role that you're playing within the organization, and obviously those who are obviously, working underneath you as a leader. Am I right?
Right. Absolutely. So there's a perfect example of this. So Walmart, which is one of the biggest employers in the United States, recently announced that they're closing their North Carolina office, and they want people to move, back to, I think it's either Texas, or maybe they're closing their Jersey office. And anyway, they're closing an office on the East Coast. Now they have two main hubs, which their main headquarters in Arkansas, and then I believe an office in Texas. They didn't send a memo out and say, in 5 days' time, everybody has to come back to work. We're going to go completely work in office, right? This is months in the making. They're working with their staff. They're offering jobs for people that are located in a location that is no longer going to exist. Let's bring you to this office. Do you want to go to Arkansas or do you want to go to Texas? They're doing it right. There's a level of transparency when sweeping changes are being made, and a lot of sweeping changes are being made in a lot of organizations and a lot of industries here, that when you're transparent about it and you're communicative about it, you find that that's why these folks have a great reputation for culture, because they understand and they care that people have lives, and your kid is enrolled at school and you found a daycare that you absolutely love, or your mother-in-law lives 2 doors down and they're giving you an option. That's what makes them great employers, and that's why they have good company culture, not because someone is sitting in an office talking culture. They treat people like they deserve to be treated. And everybody understands that a business is a business. It's a bottom line. And sometimes you have to cut costs, and sometimes you have to cut locations, and sometimes you want people to come back into the office. But when you do it in a way like they're doing it, it makes it a lot easier journey.
Definitely. And I'm hearing you 1,000% here. I mean, if you were to look at it then from the other side, this would then in essence be a challenge then that executives face, that some executives would face when trying to align their personal brand with the company's long-term goals. So it's everything is embedded, I feel, and everything is connected.
And when you feel informed and you have the option of making decisions that are right for you and not having decisions made for you. Yeah, totally different ballgame for how it is that your own loyalty is reflected, your own love of your job is reflected. And people that love their jobs and go to work, fairly happy, and you're not going to be happy all day, every day, right? But people who are happy and they feel valued, they're always going to give more than people that are dialing it in.
Yeah, I mean, that validation is so important, hey?
It is.
It really is. Robyn, I'm going to dig a little bit deeper with you right now. So your journey itself, right, in career branding and storytelling, I would love to find out from you who are up to about 3 people that you would say you personally know that has inspired or mentored you and how they have actually shaped your career.
Okay, so the first was a boss that I had. I was hired for a position that I didn't necessarily feel I was qualified for. And it was with an organization that had recently installed a female CEO, and they were looking for other females to move into executive roles. And I got a phone call from a headhunter, and I went through the process. I'm like, I don't know, this is a big job. I don't know that I have the skills. And I remember when he offered me the job and I said, are you sure? And his name was Randy. And he said, I can teach you anything about this business, but I cannot teach you how to have a personality. And that always stuck with me as I grew my own business. And, here at Storyline, this is actually kind of funny. Our one big requirement is that you have a sense of humor. So we always ask people to tell us a joke or tell us something funny that happened to them. And the reason is, I have 70 staff, right? We all work remotely. So we're talking on Slack all day. We're messaging one another. Our business is very busy. It's very rapid pace. And if you don't have a little bit of a sense of humor or you can't find the funny when, it's stressful, somebody's tech went down, somebody called off at the last minute, or, that for me is like the saving grace for company. The second person would be my sister. And I wrote a book last year and I talk about her. She's like a really lovely person. She was a probation officer her entire career. She retired a couple of years ago after 35 years of So she started off, in one role where she was, working with parolees. Then she ran what is called the house arrest program. These are people, first-time offenders, DUI or drug offenses or whatever, and you've got them on house arrest. And then through the years, she kind of moved through and she was a supervisor. She never, ever, ever lost her empathy or sympathy for people. And she was on call all the time. And I remember being at her house, or she'd be at my house, and it would be someone calling her, or back in the day, they had beepers, her, and she'd get on the phone. And she was so sweet. Things like, hey, I need to make a last minute request. If you were on house arrest, you couldn't leave the house without telling your probation officer. So they would call and they would, or leave her a message, and she would be writing it down, and she would be so sweet. And, it was something like, oh, my kid is sick and I have to take him. And she'd say, oh, no problem. I'm going to put it in your file and, we'll give you, they called it a window. I hope your baby feels better. And I thought, after 30 some years of dealing with, some of these folks were repeat offenders. They sort of lived their life in this place. Or, people that did really bad things. She never lost her kindness for people. And to me, that is really a true Leader. And then I would say the third person is, I follow Sarah Blakely, who is the founder of Spanx. And I feel like Storyline Resumes was sort of an accidental success. And I think hers was as well. Now, we are nowhere near in the same stratosphere, right? But I love her because she has sort of maintained her genuineness. She's about female empowerment. She seems very funny. Everything that she posts and everything that she says, she's really vulnerable. I am as well. I tell crazy stories about my life and my family and failings and, big mistakes. And so I would have to say those are the 3 people.
Oh, that's amazing. So the three people that you've just mentioned are actually quite different from one another, but it would be so cool to know if you have any unique perspectives or even expertise in a way that you think they bring into the world of branding and storytelling, because these are stories in their own way.
I will tell you, being a very long time poster on LinkedIn, so I have a million followers, hundreds of millions of people view my posts. Everyone is looking for happy. Everyone is looking for a happy ending. They're looking for a good story. They're looking for how someone overcame a challenge or an obstacle. They see themselves in my stories. And the posts that I do that get the most engagement, that get people really talking, are the ones where there is a genuine ending, where someone came out on top. I think that we as people, and I'm not going to get too philosophical, or society, sometimes the world feels like it's on fire. And I think everyone is sort of looking for that glimmer of hope. That's why I share so many stories of our clients and some of the BS that they've gone through in their job search and how they were able to stick with it and come out on top on the other end, is the inspiration that we all need.
And I think it's so important. You're living and you're breathing your brand. I mean, if you look at the sort of the position that you are in, and I mean, I'm not an expert on Robin or storyline resumes, so please forgive me. But you know what I'm trying to say, that you are the person who's that sort of point of call. So when people are losing jobs, or when people are looking to be inspired, or when they're looking to be empowered, you are the one that they are reaching out to. So you need to be able to navigate them in the right way, try and get them to reach those high points, and understand that their failings are actually part of character building, I guess, and even portfolio building, at the end of the day. So I think it's absolutely wonderful work that you're doing. This is like
So I have an
amazing.
amazing team in place, and they
Yeah.
really handle the day-to-day, the interviewing of the client, the onboarding of the client, the writing of the resume. And I have the luxury of spending my days doling out free advice, answering questions. I have a lot of followers on LinkedIn, and my favorite stories are the ones where people don't know me. I don't know them. Maybe they're not a client of ours, but recently, and I'll give you like a point in case. It was a female, a single mom. She's an administrative executive, an administrative assistant, and she has been out of work and she's been interviewing. And she said, all I kept hearing was your voice in my head, even though we don't know each other and I've never spoken with you. I thought, is, know your value. Don't settle for something that, and she said, and it was hard because I'm the only breadwinner in my family. And I had to pass up opportunities where I wasn't feeling valued. And she did end up accepting a job, and it was $30,000 more than she was making. $30,000 to an executive client of ours is nothing. $30,000 to someone else, a single mom, an executive assistant, maybe a salesperson, a mid-level, that can be a life-changing thing. And when you own that you are worth it, and if I help influence that a tiny little bit, that's the biggest thing that happened to me today.
Well, that's amazing. And I mean, at the end of the day, you've got the right team, because you are all, again, you're living and breathing the brand, and you're living and breathing that vision. So I think that's wonderful. I
Thank
want to just touch base. You're very welcome. I just want to touch base on, you were chatting about executives now as well in the mix. And it seems like, some executives don't actually grasp how their personal brand can impact their company's growth. What I would love to know from you is, from your experience, what do most leaders actually fail to realize about this connection? What would you say to that?
I would say that they fail to realize how they behave at work, how they coach and mentor others, whether or not they coach and mentor them, how it is that they align whatever message they're trying to tell and gain the buy-in of the people that they're trying to tell it to, are going to be the two or three most critical things that they do as a leader. I've seen a lot of people move from being a staff member to being in management, and they're sort of dizzy with power, right? So they're not really doing the day-to-day work, but they're telling people what to do. You are never going to gain buy-in and loyalty and success from people by scaring them, right? The old joke, the beatings will continue until, everyone, is successful. I think that that's probably the biggest disconnect, and that your personal brand, it doesn't have to be untrue of who you are. If you're quirky, if you're quiet, if you're shy, maybe if you don't think that you are a great mentor, or maybe you don't think that you are the best leader because you don't know how to really get people to learn it. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to understand your shortcomings. I remember a client, this was from years ago, and this always stuck with me. And he was interviewing for a job. It was an executive role. And they asked him in the interview, what is your greatest weakness? And his greatest weakness really was data. He did not understand how reports were created. He didn't understand how to interpret them, movement reports, revenue reports, or whatever. And he said in the interview, and he said, listen, my biggest weakness is that I don't understand the numbers. I don't understand where it comes from. I don't understand how to interpret them. And he said, so here's what I did. I went to, so-and-so in my old company. And I said, would you spend a couple of hours working with me to figure out how I read a P&L, how I would create a P&L, how it is that I would look at data and be able to interpret that. And somebody did that for him. And he said, now I feel comfortable. I'm no expert, but I know that that's not something that I'm strong at. So I think understanding what you're not good at is just as important as leaning into your strengths.
Totally loving that. Now, on the flip side, Robynn, have you seen a leader actually neglect their personal brand and have it negatively affect their company's reputation?
Yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of examples of that, especially in the last year. Better.com comes to mind, where that CEO got on and was very sort of abrupt, and people remember that. Whether or not that will impact that person in the future. Other, corporations have sort of done the same thing. There is a level of humanity, I think, that has been missing during these layoffs, right? That really resonate with people, even if they themselves weren't personally affected, even if they weren't part of that layoff. But I think that kind of stuff and those kinds of behaviors and that kind of persona eventually comes back to bite you in the ass.
Yeah, I love that you're saying that. That is very, very true. Now, Robynn, I'd also like to find out from you. I mean, leaders who feel like personal branding isn't actually as critical as their day-to-day responsibilities. How would you actually shift that mindset, or how do you shift that mindset?
Yeah, I mean, companies are sort of people identify companies with their leaders, especially if they're high profile leaders. So you wouldn't, Microsoft obviously has Bill Gates, and then you've got Richard Branson at Virgin. I mean, there's a lot of really high profile leaders. Their personalities, their brands, their reputation, what they do can make or break how people feel about your product, how people feel about your company. No matter what you think about technology, when you think about somebody like Bill Gates, who is taking his money and doing so much good in the world, when you think about Richard Branson, who does, I know this because he does a thing on LinkedIn where he does like an Ask Richard segment. To me, when I hear his name or I see him, I think about him a certain way because I think he's approachable. I have no idea if he's approachable. Maybe he's the most unapproachable, but the branding is based on what he's approachable. That makes me like that brand. That makes me want to buy that product. So I think that people need to realize when you're in a really high profile position as a leader of an organization or even an everyday executive, how people feel about you is going to reflect how they feel about company, how they feel about your product, how they feel about your service.
Then I guess you would say that for CEOs and executives that are actually looking to scale, that kind of branding, because I mean, the branding itself, personal branding, it's not just about visibility. It can actually be a game changer where you can attract investors and high caliber talent. And that's what is actually making that 100%. Brand strong.
And if you have the reputation as a good person who's doing the right thing by people and you fail royally, it's not going to be as brutal for you as it is for someone who is highly disliked. So I think those things are all important to know as well.
So looking beyond numbers, an executive's personal brand
and how it actually shapes the perception then of the company's future growth and culture. I mean, this is something that you don't just come out there and, like you were talking about Richard Branson, for example, it's something that you need to maintain all the way through. And this would then in turn affect your future growth and affect your company's culture as well moving forward, right?
Absolutely. So in Resume Speak, we talk about obstacles, challenges, and opportunities. How did you overcome an obstacle? What was the greatest challenge in this role? What were the opportunities that you saw here? So one of the questions that we ask our clients when we're going through our resume interview is, what was the situation when you got here? Where was this broken? Where was this failing? How was it not working? Whether or not that's from a people, a process perspective. And we have them tell us stories. And then from there, we determine, okay, here's what we want to focus on your resume. So if it was failing from a people perspective, how did you fix it? Tell me a story about someone specific on that team, or bringing it. So when you get into specifics, it's really easy to say, I built a great team. But it's much more difficult. And what you should be focusing on is, I had a team of 3 people. All 3 of them were not meeting their goals. Within the first, 6 months, they were. Here's how I did it. This is what I can relate to. And if I'm a hiring manager and you say, I made them successful, right? I don't know how interested I am. But if you tell me the specifics for how it is that you did it and you give me an example, I hoped one of my sales reps who had been going after a key account for 3 years and failing, I helped them get their first appointment when I made this suggestion. And now that's a $2 million account for them. That to me has meaning. It's something I can sink my teeth into. It's something I can relate to. And the biggest thing about your race, it's got to be relatable.
Now, are there specific metrics or tools that you can recommend to track how personal branding actually affects recruitment, sales, or even investor interest? Because I know you spoke about metrics earlier, but is there actual tools that you would recommend if I am, wanting to track this myself? Say I'm the leader of this organization. I'd like to be able to track how my personal branding is affecting, those various sectors that I just mentioned. How can I do so? Where do I start? What do I do?
I would definitely work with your internal marketing team, work with an agency to figure out what KPIs are directly impacted by, how it is that you behave at work, how it is that you lead. It's really going to be, it's going to be employee engagement. It's going to be customer perception. Of course, you can always measure revenue. You can measure retention. There's a million different things that you can measure. There is, I think, definitely a little bit of a squiggly line between someone's own personal brand, how it is that they impact that organization's success, and how those things are married and how they may not be. That's where I think a really good marketer or a really good data analytics team is going to come in.
So then how would I as an executive distinguish between personal branding efforts that are working versus those that are not resonating
there's lots of tools online, your own social media, your reputation score, how many followers you have on a place like LinkedIn, or, how many people are engaging with your company website, going to your corporate profile. If you've got a story to tell, maybe you're a leader and you're really a huge proponent of being philanthropic. You want to be really active in your community, and then telling those stories for things that you've done to make your community stronger through your efforts, right? Having that on your website, how many people are visiting that? Are you getting any kind of media inquiries? Those are all things that can be measured. But again, you need good data analytics people, and you need to find the avenues of where you're either getting engagement, you're getting feedback, you're getting scores. I think that companies are so good about, so for instance, I ordered new appliances and I ordered them from the Home Depot. And then I'm redoing the kitchen. So right now, they're supposed to come on Monday and take my kitchen cabinets out. That has been delayed. So they're not now coming till next Monday. So I had to get online at the Home Depot, and I had to say, hey, I don't want these appliances delivered next Friday. I want them delivered the following Friday. So I got on the chat. I had a little engagement. It was super easy, quick in and out. The person on the other end was so helpful. No problem. We picked a time, yada, yada. And then they immediately sent me a little survey. It was 2 questions. Did your problem get resolved? And was this person helpful to you? When I answered yes to both, then they took me to another screen and they said, if you have 3 minutes, will you answer some additional questions? And I enjoyed answering the first two questions and the engagement that I had with your employee, right? And hell yeah, I'm going to give you my 3 minutes. But they asked me for, do you mind giving us 3 minutes of your time instead of here, launch into the survey that's going to take you 28 minutes. I think that so for me, that's why I buy my appliances at Home Depot, because it's the same kind of experience. I could buy my appliance anywhere. It's the same kind of experience I have with them all the time. And for me, that comes from the top down. Everything about the culture, how people engage with their customers, are things easy or are they hard? That's okay. So for me, that's about branding, right? And that all comes from the top.
And I think it's consideration. I mean, when you ask it like that, it makes me feel like I'm being invited to this, as opposed to you shouting at me to do something because you said so. and it's very subtle. It's very subtle.
With stuff and content and requests and information is coming to us, and we're getting lambasted with emails and messages and blah, blah, blah questions. I've got email, I've got text messages, I've got LinkedIn messages, I've got Slack, I've got, all of this stuff going on all the time. If someone would just say, hey, do you mind? That makes all the difference. Yeah. It's all about tone, right? Everything I think is about tone.
So, Robynn, for agencies and consultants that are helping businesses position their leadership teams, executive branding is often an underutilized tool. And I mean, we're talking about this extensively right now. So how can they then best communicate its value to their clients?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you're working with an agency or you're working with a marketing team, you both have to be on the same page of what's important to you, whether or not that's how it is that you treat your employees, whether or not your culture is important, whether or not your communication with your stakeholders or your shareholders is more important. I think that you kind of have to align what you want the message to be, and everybody needs to believe it. I don't think that you can market a company with a message that no one believes or feels an affinity towards. So whether, even if that message is funny or that message is, we care about people, there is nothing more disappointing than an organization that builds themselves as an organization that cares about people and then makes the news by doing some sort of heinous layoff by Zoom. It degrades the entire idea that you are a company that cares about people, and it kind of makes you a joke. So I think that you have to figure out, what is that identity? If you're really all about creating the best skateboard in the world and you don't really care how you get there, then make that your brand. We only care about being, and we'll step over top of you and we'll step over our competition and we'll do this. You see where I'm going with this example. If it's genuine, you're golden. If it's disingenuous, people will call you out. And I think that's the biggest thing.
And it's so important to remember that even though it might be, say, for example, you have an organization, you've got 100 people in there working for you, and you lay them off in that manner, and you lay maybe off, 20, 30 of them in that manner, that those people then talk to the people who are remaining there. And it just all sort of starts trickling down, right, into the organization itself. And I would think, if anything, this would then cause a major disruption, not only in your revenue, but in company culture.
Well, you saw last year, I mean, there were so many instances of, people recording their layoffs and then putting them on social media, to the point that their PR folks or their CEOs had to come out and make a public statement. You never want to be in that situation, right? And so when I think that you do things the right way with, people's, I don't want to say feelings, because, again, Gen X, I'm not so much about the feelings. But if you do it in a way that's respectful of people, the time that they spent, the work that they did, the loyalty that they had to your organization, and you understand, hey, it's a business. Sometimes people are going to get laid off. We have to cut costs or whatever. But when you do it in a way that's respectful, I don't think it's ever a problem, right? But when you do it in a way that feels so yucky, that's when you sort of run into the problem. And I keep using the layoffs as an example because so many people got laid off last year.
There's been a lot. Yes, there's been a lot. And I mean, it's so important to note that, because, when you have the sense of the organization has this transparency, it actually bodes so well for you as a leader, for just, your peers, and for the organization itself, because people actually, even though they're being laid off, if you've done it in a certain way, they'd understand why it's happening. And unfortunately, because of XYZ, this is where we find ourselves.
Absolutely. I always say that class has sort of left the building. So any kind of decorum, any kind of class, it feels like somebody threw that over the side of the ship last year. So I'm hoping that that comes back. I mean, and that translates in hiring as well. You have a lot of really big organizations and people are interviewing and no one calls them or lets them know that they didn't get the job. This is a very small cog in an interviewing wheel. Send me an email, send me a text and say, hey, love meeting you. We picked an internal candidate or we picked somebody else, wishing you the best. People want closure. They don't want to be treated like they don't matter. Not something that you remember.
So, Robyn, then what would you say is actually the most effective way that agencies can actually demonstrate the ROI of executive branding, just touching base on what we were mentioning earlier, in a way that actually clicks with business leaders?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you're trying to build, right? What are you trying to fix? Are you trying to build a bigger social media presence? Are you trying to grow your revenue? Are you trying to, gain the reputation as the top leader in whatever product or service that you're selling? It depends on what it is that you're trying to achieve when you're working with the agency or you're working with that marketing team. And then you've got to put measurements in place for how it is that you're going to put a number on that. Is it engagement on your website? Is it increased revenue? It's almost always increased revenue. Is it more people's perception? It depends on what your goal is.
In this day and age, we're always looking at these instant results. It must be now and it must happen now. So, I mean, how would you then, how would agencies or how should agencies then manage expectations when it comes to personal branding? Because it's not always this instant results case. It's sometimes a journey, right?
Yes, I'm a business owner and, we have worked with service providers around, different things that we were trying to fill, new website or, launching a new product or service. You get marketers. And the first thing that they tell you is this is going to take 6 months. We're going to build this in an organic way. I think as an agency, you need to be really honest about what kind of results that you can expect and when you can expect them. Because if I'm spending hundreds of thousands of dollars and I want to see immediate results and you take my hundreds of thousands of dollars and then you tell me that you're going to get immediate results and you and I both know that isn't true, now I don't trust you. So I think the most important thing is this transparency, letting people know that they may see some, influence, pretty quickly. But on average, you're the marketing agency, you're the advertising agency. You need to say, it's 8 to 12 months before you start seeing real results. And then people have their expectations reset. I think honesty is really where it's at.
Robyn, I am now going to a question that I am very curious about, and I would love for you to really dig deep into this one, okay? So I hope you're ready for me. This question is around balancing authority and approachability as a leader. So we were chatting about it earlier. You said Richard Branson, in terms of just his brand himself, you don't know him personally, but you do know that, that's a space where he's at. So he comes across as approachable, but you don't necessarily know him personally, as you mentioned. Now, some executives actually struggle with how to present themselves. Do they need to be authoritative and polished, or should they be more approachable and relatable? And then how do you help them find that balance? I think would be something I'd love to touch on. Yeah.
So I think that you need to be true to who you are. So if you are a person who is inherently shy, you're quiet, I think that you need to build your own personal way, incorporating what are the quirks or the attributes of your personality. You are not going to be the guy that walks into the meeting on the stage and cracking jokes and right. You're not going to be like the Wolf of Wall Street guy, right? You're not going to out and crack jokes and swallow goldfish. I think that you need to identify who you are as a human, what has worked for you in the past, and really build your approach around really genuine your personality. So I tend to be someone who is loud. I am fun. I am always cracking a joke. I am always saying things like, hey, you don't feel well, go ahead and go. And then I'm sending a care package by, Instacart to your door with couple of hours and ordering pizza for your family later because you are feeling sick, right? That's my leadership identity. My team knows that I'm going to do those things because that's who I am as a person. I'm an Italian mother. I want to feed you soup and, make, right? So that's what I lean into. I am not a kind of leader who's going to go in to a meeting and be very, very stern and, sort of gain your respect with my knowledge of, I'm going to go into a meeting and the first thing we're going to say is, what's going wrong? Let's talk about it. Let's hash it out. I know what my strengths are. And so I think that's what leaders need to do. I think they need to know what their strengths are. They need to know what they're comfortable with. And it's okay to push the boundaries and to make yourself uncomfortable as a leader as well. But I think that trying to be someone that you are not is probably the biggest failure of a lot of leaders. So that answers that part of that question. I think that you have to have a balance of those things. I think that you have to gain people's respect by being authoritative. I think that you don't want people defying you on a regular basis. But I also think that you need to have that balance where people feel comfortable enough saying, I think you're wrong here, and really being willing to listen. I think that, we talked about the sort of number one thing that leader needs to have is empathy, but I think that they also have to have the ability to listen to others, right? Why go through all of the effort of hiring and training and developing and surrounding yourself with smart people and never listening to them? Steve Jobs was sort of famous for that, right? I'm not going to bring people on that I admire, that I think are super smart, and then not listen to them. They're here to tell me what to do, not the other way around. So I think that when you have a leader who is a listener, I think that's where the magic happens, right? It's where the innovation comes. It's where the open-mindedness comes from. It's where you grow a business from nothing to millions, or you grow your market share from this much to this much because you've listened to smart people that you yourself have hired.
Yeah, and I'm loving this. And I feel like when you're talking, it's like these little light bulbs are sort of going off. And you're making absolutely 100% sense. But in hindsight, so we were chatting about vulnerability, right? And we're talking a little bit about that now. So now vulnerability in leadership, it's a very hot topic. We actually had a discussion with a gentleman called Bobby Umar. I'm not too sure if you know him, but absolutely wonderful man. He also spoke about vulnerability, in terms of leadership itself. And he himself speaks very openly about who he is and where he is. And this has helped him to be such a powerful force with everything it is that he does, which is amazing. It's absolutely amazing. But now vulnerability, and then being too personal. Sometimes I think executives feel, or perhaps executives feel, that there's this sort of like fear that it could actually damage your credibility. I mean, how exactly would you then address that concern? Should we address that concern?
So I'll give you a perfect example. A couple of years ago, there was this thing that happened, and I can't remember if it was on LinkedIn or somewhere else, the crime CEO. So it was a guy who he was the owner of a startup company, and it was around COVID, and he ended up having to lay a bunch of people off, and he videotaped himself crying about having to leave.
Yes.
Remember that?
I remember. Okay. And didn't it come across disingenuous, I think?
Yes, very much so. And it became a meme. So if you are doing something and you become a meme, obviously that's not what you want, right? So I have no problem with crying, right? So I think if you cry and you're whatever, genuine, and telling a story and tearing up, I mean, that's going to make me like you, right? It's going to make me feel like you're being vulnerable, you're being honest about your feelings. And, we all feel hurt sometimes, and we all feel bad, and you have to let people go. And, it's just going to really endear you to me if you're, emotional about it, right? But it felt very construed. I'm videotaping myself, I'm crying. And you know what? He really genuinely was crying, but how he kind of marketed that and released that, it ended up being not great, right? So I think that you can be vulnerable by showing that you're a human and that this impacts you in a way that makes you sad. But ultimately, at the end of the day, as a leader, you have a lot of people relying on you for leadership, for their livelihood, before the decisions are made. So you don't want to be someone who is perceived as a pushover or too emotional or whatever. It's funny that we're talking about executives, and women, I think, have been dealing with this for a long time. And we always say there's no crying at work, right? If you're a woman, because I grew up in that, came up through the ranks when, if you had to cry, you went in the bathroom, you did it. You certainly weren't doing it. Of course we had to cry. People treated us like shit, and men were awful sometimes. And, you were young, and, they said things, not men in general, men, women, other people said things or, did whatever. That made you uncomfortable. And so you went in the bathroom and cried. I'm not saying that you can't cry. But, at some point you have to figure out, where am I crossing the line here? And I think that most people ultimately know. If you're in a leadership role, you probably already know where the line is, right? You want to be empathetic. You want to, if you're impacted by something, if you're sad about it, it's okay to say I'm impacted by it too. I'm sad about it. We're letting go a lot of good people that, I've come to call friends or whatever. That is genuine. But, when you're just out there and you're kind of, cutting folks or you're, making decisions and there's no explanation, it seems really ridiculous. It seems really cold or hard-hearted. That's where you run into problems. It's all about balance. Everything is about balance. Some people are going to be better at it than others.
We're approaching a client. We need to get an agency on board. And you're doing the how do you say what's the word that I'm looking for? It's like the something works. Like when the tears are just running and every
crocodile tears.
Yeah. And as an agency, I feel like I don't want to place my business in your hands. So
there was a saying back in the day, like when I was coming up through corporate America, talk softly and carry a big stick, right? People respond to strength, whether or not that is quiet strength or in your face strength. It's something that people refer to in politics. They refer to it in business. They refer to it in the family dynamic. You are never afraid of your mother who was screaming at you and chasing you around with a wooden spoon like our mothers used to do that. You're not responding to that because you're hearing it over and over and over and over. But if your dad is a quiet guy, and he's a little more serious, as my husband is, and he walks in the door and says, "Hey kids, empty the dishwasher," those kids are up off that couch. They're emptying that dishwasher because they respect him. He's not, belly aching all the time. He's not yelling at them all the time. So I do think that there is definitely something to be said about that philosophy of talk softly and carry a big stick. So gaining people's respect isn't necessarily dictated by an authoritarian personality. It's by the ability to gain respect through your actions, whether or not you're a vivacious, you're a fun, you're a, nurturing person, maybe like me or like you, or if you're more of a quiet, I understand what's going on, come to me with your solutions and not your problems kind of gal, that gets a different kind of respect. Respect in the end is the same, no matter what avenue it comes down, right? The goal is to gain the respect. However you need to do it, you need to get there.
Now, Robynn, you've built an incredible reputation helping executives craft standout personal brands. So what would you say one needs to look out for in the right agency partner to handle something as personal and high stakes as executive branding?
Yeah, I think that your values about how you want to tell your story don't necessarily need to be the same, or your idea of how to tell your story don't necessarily need to be the same, because people come to us with a perception that they want to build a resume or build a personal brand in one way. And we say, listen, let me tell you why, we'll go along with that, but let me tell you what I think might be a better suggestion. When you gain buy-in or you gain people's trust just by the pure number of years that we've been doing it, by the number of people that we've helped, by the industries that we've worked in, by the caliber of our own staff, right? You've got to gain their trust. And if they're going to build something, whether it's a resume or a biography or a branding package, with an organization like ours, the first thing they need to know is that we have their best interest at heart. And we're not saying that we're going to build it this way because this is the way we've always done it. We don't. We do things differently year to year to year, depending on the market, right? It's because of our experience and our understanding that you and I are both on the same side. So I think that's the most important lesson here. So whether or not you're hiring an agency to do work for you or you're hiring a resume company, you need to know that you're both on the same side. And ultimately, the goal is the same, for you to get the best possible opportunities.
I'm hearing you, and then just like to build a little on that, in terms of what you're talking to. So when choosing an agency, then how much weight would you say should be placed on their deep understanding of your specific industry and target audience versus actually their overall expertise in branding execution?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important, right? I mean, I'm a company that's been around for 25 years. I mean, collectively, with our team, we've got hundreds of years of experience, right? This is wisdom that you cannot buy. You cannot teach someone who is a new resume writer to understand what happens in the day-to-day life of a CEO of a Fortune 1000 company, right? You can do the research, but we've talked to CEOs of Fortune 1000 companies all day long, right? We interview them, we write resumes for them, they go on to get bigger, better jobs, whatever. So I think the experience is such a sort of generic word because I have great experience. The experience and the wisdom, the insight, the instincts, those are things that you cannot buy, right? That comes from collectively all of these people with all of their backgrounds, whether it's from human resources, whether it's from headhunting or being a recruiter or being an operations executive or college professor or an employee of a big company or even a small company, a startup expert, an expert in the federal space. That's what you're looking for. You want to know that this resource, this organization, and we're a company that shares resources all the time. So if I've got an interviewer working with someone, say in an industry that they're not particularly interested or experienced in, or they've not worked in that industry, they're going to go to their, team of 30 interviewers and say, anybody here ever work with somebody that's, coming from the NFL? And somebody on my staff is going to say, yes, here's what you need to be asking. So it's that ability to share knowledge and understand that you're not going to know everything all the time, and have those resources at your fingertips, which we do. I think that's the most important thing to know.
In terms of the CEOs that you mentioned, do you have any names that you could part with to say these are the people that I've actually assisted in terms of storyline resumes?
So a lot of folks are very high profile, people that people that you know their name, you see them in the news. So the best thing that I always say is if you go to my LinkedIn profile and you go to our recommendations, and there's hundreds of them, and someone left us a recommendation, that is a client that we worked with. Now that is fair game because they went on a public platform and they left their name and they left a recommendation. So that's where I say to go.
What would you say is actually some red flags then that companies should be mindful of when they're evaluating potential partners for executive branding? Are there any that comes to mind right now?
Yeah, I think sort of over-promising is a red flag. Invest this amount of money and you can, generate X amount, and nobody can really predict that. They can use their knowledge and understanding of marketing or, PR or advertising or anything like that to evaluate what they think your results might be, but no one can guarantee those things. It's really the same with like a resume business. People always say, do you guarantee results? And we say, listen, if you go to a resume company and they say they're going to guarantee their result, they're not. There's no way to guarantee that. We do the best possible job in telling your story. What you do after that, if you go to an interview and you tank it, if you rely solely on, maybe one outlet of applying for a job instead of the 50 different suggestions that we're making in terms of where to look for and apply for a job, and you ignore those, I can't guarantee that you're going to get what you want. And it would be the same thing with an ad agency, a marketing agency, or any kind of consulting firm. No one can guarantee anything, but what they can do is tell you how it is that they think that they can help you. And then if you're all on the same page and they're genuine and you trust that, then you make that call.
Totally. We're kind of coming to a close right now, Robyn. So I wanted to find out from you. I mean, there's LinkedIn, podcasts, other digital platforms. And it just shows you how executive branding is actually, I mean, it's evolving fast. And there's so many different ways that you can access so many different things. So what would you say are the major trends that are actually shaping the way that leaders are building their brands today?
I think they're being more visible. I think that really smart companies that have really great leaders are aligning their reputation and their identity of their organization along with their leaders. With really great CEOs that are out there. They're, again, walking the walk and talking the talk. And no one is going to be a better advocate or a better advertiser for your organization than a leader who is well respected and relatable and clearly loves what they do for their job. And I think that is the best thing that a leader can be.
And then, because you're touching on that right now, would you say then that podcasts are actually becoming like a go-to platform for thought leadership? I mean, this is obviously changing the way that executives are now connecting with their audience, right?
Absolutely. I mean, social media is everywhere. And,
Yeah.
I think that, as consumers, we feel excited and happy and interested to hear from sort of the people behind the scenes, behind the curtain. I don't know, you're too young to remember this. There was a guy by the name of Lee Iacocca. He was the CEO of Chrysler, which is a car company. And, they went through some really tumultuous times back in the day when I was a kid, and I remember that. And he sort of turned them around, and they ended up coming out on top. And then after that, everything that you thought of when you thought of that car brand aligned to that guy, and he was everywhere. It was sort of the old-timey way of aligning that brand to the person who was running it, and they did a phenomenal job of sort of capitalizing on that. I think that if you can kind of capitalize on how people feel, consumers feel, how the media feels about the leaders, I think that you're in for a winning ride.
You speak a lot about LinkedIn, and I know you do quite a bit of things, that's happening on LinkedIn in terms of yourself and storyline resumes, but it has actually become quite a crowded space, right? So
Yes.
What would you say then is the best way for me as an executive? Say I'm trying to actually break through the noise, I'm trying to stand out.
It's so crowded on LinkedIn. And so I am always fond of saying LinkedIn rewards its users with higher visibility. So you want to engage. You want to give intelligent dialogue. You want to post. You want to comment. If someone reaches out to you for help, you want to help. If you are a LinkedIn lurker, that you're always on LinkedIn, but you never like anything, you never comment on anything, or you're not going to get the kind of attention. So I'll tell you a really quick little funny story. And it was about a gal that commented on one of my posts. And I can't even remember what the post was about. But I have a reputation on LinkedIn of being a real advocate for job seekers. And I also am kind of funny, and I want to be good with everyone, and I want to mom everybody. You know what I mean? Right. I know. Maybe it'll be fun. But anyway, so anyway, she said, "Hey, I'm a data analyst. I'm out of a job. I would love to come sling data for you." And I responded to her, and we had the cutest little exchange. And she was so positive. And then I looked at her profile, and she had been out of work, and the job she had before, she had, been out of work before that and wasn't in it very long. So she had like a run of bad luck. Someone saw that. A hiring manager who was looking for someone to come and sling data saw that exchange and gave her a message, and she ended up getting that job. And then the funniest thing was the guy who hired her messaged me and said, "Hey, I've been following you for years. I saw this exchange. She was a delight. We couldn't seem to find who we were looking for. We absolutely loved her. And we made the hiring process really, really quick because I knew that you would go on LinkedIn and talk about it." And I, complain about that all the time. I'm like, don't take a year to hire somebody. Do it in a couple of weeks. It ended up coming full circle. So that's the kind of results that you can expect. People go on LinkedIn and they tell their story of their struggle, and they go viral, and they get, 20 job offers. So I think it's really important to understand the power of LinkedIn, but also understand that there's no power in LinkedIn unless you're willing to engage and put yourself out there.
I'm just loving that. That's an absolutely wonderful story. Oh my goodness. Imagine that. I mean, the feeling you must have gotten in that moment thinking, oh my gosh, this has happened. Like
It's
this
so
person,
thrilling because,
it's
I want good things to happen to everybody.
yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I absolutely love it. I mean, I live for those stories. So it's so
Yeah.
gratifying.
Okay, so my last question to you is, looking ahead, where do you see executive branding actually heading in the next few years, especially with the way that digital transformation is actually increasing, and we spoke about it, leadership visibility itself.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that there's always going to be outlets for digital branding. I think that the resume is always going to be relevant because no matter who you are, what you've done, what role you're in, how much money you make, anytime you're looking for a new position or you're engaged with a recruiter or a headhunter or someone reaches out to you or you reach out to them, the first and last thing they always say is send me your resume, right? So do I think that that's good? That's always going to remain, right? So we're always going to be busy writing resumes. I think that LinkedIn is always a really good place, but I think there's also other places. I think there's other social media. People do really well on TikTok, and that's not a place that you would normally go to look for a job. But movers and shakers are on there. Facebook, another place that you would never go to look for a job. But again, a lot of people are on there. And you certainly have an older generation on LinkedIn. Lots of hiring managers, lots of executives go to Facebook and tell your story. So I think that there's always going to be this little bit of social media presence. That's going to be LinkedIn or Facebook or TikTok or Instagram or whatever. But there may be other places. There's always new places where you can go and tell your story, where you can be found. I think that the job boards are struggling a little bit right now because they're kind of overrun. But I think that, having a good digital footprint and knowing what is being said about you online is always going to be critical. So that's something that I think we're going to be looking at with a critical eye in the future.
Robynn, this has been absolutely incredible. You have been so insightful. I love the way you speak. It's like you're telling everything in these like batches of stories. So thank you so much for joining us on the DesignRush podcast. I really
Thank you
appreciate
so
your
much.
time.
It was such a pleasure. I really
It's great.
appreciate you having me.
Thank you. Take care.
Curious about what top brands look for when choosing an agency? Tune in to our latest episodes where we reveal the decision-making secrets of leading brands. Subscribe to the DesignRush podcast and stay ahead of the competition.